my trip here is actually the very first time that I've left Brazil since I began reporting on the documents once I left Hong Kong. That was almost 10 months ago. And the reason I haven't left Brazil until yesterday when I traveled here is because my government has very deliberately created a threatening climate where they want not only myself, but the colleagues with whom I've been working to be concerned about what our ability actually is to travel freely. And as a result, we've been called criminals, we've been called thieves, we've been called Edward Snowden's accomplices. We've had high-level officials in the Obama administration overtly arguing that we ought to be prosecuted for the journalism that we've been doing, despite the constitutional right that we in the United States have, like you in Germany have, that guarantees a free press. And I was a little bit uncertain about whether I ought to do that, whether that was a smart thing. And one of the reasons why I decided I would in this instance was because I felt very comfortable coming here to Berlin. And a reason that I was so comfortable is because other people who have been working with similar risks to tell not only the United States, but the entire world about this system of suspicionless surveillance have been here in Berlin working the entire time because they feel safe here, even though they don't feel safe in their home countries, namely the leaders of the free world, the United States and Great Britain, where they feel threatened. It's really been interesting to me over the past 10 months because there are a lot of people who love to bash the media and criticize journalists. And I am definitely one of those people. I love attacking the media. And I think it's really actually well-deserved. But one of the things that I've gotten to really understand in a visceral way over the last 10 months because of the visibility of the work that I've been doing is just how many journalists there are around the world who are incredibly devoted to their craft. I got to meet hundreds of journalists who are engaged in incredibly courageous work with almost nobody knowing what it is that they're doing, really toiling in anonymity, which can actually make the work more dangerous. I mean, I think one of the reasons why we've been protected is because of the visibility of the story. There are journalists around the world who are challenging corrupt power factions who don't get on television, who aren't known to thousands of people, and therefore have no protection from reprisals. And one of the more moving episodes that I've experienced over the last 10 months was about 3 months ago when I went to speak at a journalism college in Rio de Janeiro about journalistic courage, and we spoke to maybe 500 or so journalism students. And I was there, and on the panel with me was a journalist who I had never heard of before. And I learned of his story right before the event and then heard him speak. And essentially, he's a journalist who works for a tiny little newspaper in a small town in the middle of Brazil, so basically in rural Brazil. And his newspaper is read by maybe 3,000 to 5,000 people. And he discovered, almost by a fluke, that there was extreme amounts of corruption in the police department that was the police department for the state in which his city was located. He realized he had seen an item in a budget that allocated $100,000 to a new police station 3 years ago, and he went to the spot, and there was a tiny little piece of wood, and it said 11th Police Delegation in front of it, and he realized that this was a scam. And the more he looked into it, the more he realized just how pervasive and systemic this fraud was. And it didn't only apply to finances, but to police violence and corruption. The more he dug into his police department, the more he realized it was basically like organized crime. And as he researched it more and began publishing articles on small amounts of corruption, he began getting rocks through his window, death threats posted to his door. He was beaten on several occasions, and yet he continued to pursue his journalism. And the threats got so serious that his wife left him in the middle of the journalism because she could no longer expose her children to what she thought was this danger. He actually experienced serious psychological problems, was in and out of a hospital several times. His newspaper wanted to fire him. He continued to get death threats, was beaten up 2 or 3 more times, and yet continued to pursue the story for over a year until the federal prosecutors finally intervened and put a bunch of the police officers in prison and cleaned up the department. And the reason that story is so amazing to me is because he continued to do this and risk everything that he had in his life and actually lost a lot of things in his life, really almost for no benefit. I mean, I probably still wouldn't have known about this story had he not sat next to me at that panel. Probably very few people had any idea of what he did. He didn't receive any prestigious awards. He never went on television. No one in the world knows who he is. And I actually just stopped in the middle of this event when people were asking me a lot of questions and just asked him, because I was really curious to know, what is it that motivated you to do that? I mean, why would you risk your life and get beaten up continuously and lose your marriage and your physical and mental health and put yourself and everybody you love through this extraordinary trauma simply to expose some police corruption? You know, it's probably the case that in the town right next to him, there's lots of police corruption. Probably 3 years from now, there'll be more police corruption in his town. What would motivate somebody, a journalist, to risk all that for so little? And what he said was that he doesn't actually consider himself a hero. And the answer that he gave me about why that is was actually the same exact answer that Edward Snowden gave me in Hong Kong when I asked him why, as a 29-year-old with an incredibly prosperous career and a beautiful girlfriend and a family that loves him and a stable life and everything ahead of him, why he would unravel all of that and throw that all away just for some abstract political objective, or in order to protect other people's privacy, something that he was quite capable of doing for himself. He gave me the same answer as that reporter gave when I asked him on that panel, which is, I don't actually think I was doing anything selfless, because I knew that if I chose not to pursue this, if I chose to walk away from this injustice that I found, the pain that that would cause me as it sat on my conscience for the rest of my life would be so much worse than whatever those corrupt police officers or the United States government in Snowden's case could do to me. That police officer said, I would rather be killed or beaten or have rocks thrown through my window than know that I just let this extreme corruption continue, that this money was wasted on dirty police officers instead of on poor people. Just like Edward Snowden told me I would rather go to prison for the next 40 years, that would not be as bad as knowing that I could have done something to stop this system of mass surveillance and yet chose not to. And I really do think the more that I thought about this and the more people that I've met who display the kind of courage that we're here to honor tonight are driven by that same dynamic. It almost isn't so much about courage, but about conscience. I think that really is the core attribute. It's the idea that you cannot allow wars to go raging without informing the world of the savagery and brutality that's taking place because you don't want to live with yourself walking away. Or the same with large and small scale corruption. And that to me is really the essence of journalistic courage, is the idea that as people of conscience, we don't want to allow things to go unchallenged.